It's a test of leadership that could determine the future of Europe. With a pandemic and economic recession and 27 member states to contend with, can Angela Merkel turn around the fortunes of a fractured bloc? I'm Ali Aslan, and today's newsmaker is Germany's EU presidency. How Europe fares in this crisis will determine the future of European prosperity and Europe's role in the world. Those words belong to none other than the woman who is now tasked to lead the EU. Angela Merkel will spend her last year as German Chancellor overseeing the shared destinies of more than 24 nations. Set against the backdrop of a pandemic, the economic, social, and political challenges she faces are many, and the stakes have never been higher. The 27 EU leaders are set to meet in person on Friday, but as Natalie Pohonen reports, it's unlikely they'll see eye to eye.
Angela Merkel is a woman on a mission. The task in front of the German Chancellor is perhaps one of the biggest challenges of her political career: uniting the European Union as it enters coronavirus recovery mode. So why is the onus on the Chancellor? Germany has taken the reins as EU president. The role rotates every 6 months among member states. It places Merkel front and centre, chairing meetings of EU leaders, including the first face-to-face one since the pandemic broke out. On the agenda for the next 6 months, passing a virus recovery fund, signing off on the bloc's multi-year budget, final Brexit negotiations, and responding to the COVID-19 crisis. The first item, sealing the deal on that recovery stimulus package, isn't a certainty.
Die Aufgabe ist riesig und deshalb muss die Antwort auch groß sein. Und da kann man sich jetzt nicht auf jedes Detail im Vorfeld festlegen, aber es muss eine besondere Kraftanstrengung sein, die deutlich macht, Europa möchte in dieser schweren Stunde zusammenhalten. Das hat eine politische Dimension jenseits der Zahlen.
There's a split between the 27 members about how that money should be handed out. A major portion of the €750 billion package would go to helping some of the countries hardest hit by the virus, like Spain and Italy.
E questo è il tempo della responsabilità, questo è il tempo della solidarietà. Noi dobbiamo mantenere alto il livello di ambizione politica, non dobbiamo dividerci sulle visioni nazionalistiche, perché l'Europa deve offrire soluzioni ai propri cittadini, non illusioni e paure.
The Netherlands, Austria, Sweden and Denmark, known as the Frugal Four, want the stimulus to be based on loans, not grants.
We have to find a solution.
Do you hope that there will be a solution?
I hope.
It's going to be easy, a solution?
No, not easy. This is politics. Never easy.
It only takes one member state to veto a budget. The weight of all of this isn't on Merkel's shoulders alone, but it is Germany's responsibility to lead the zone until the end of the year. And the need for leadership is clear.
Die höchste Priorität der deutschen Ratspräsidentschaft ist es, dass Europa geeint und gestärkt aus der Krise kommt. Aber wir wollen Europa nicht nur kurzfristig stabilisieren. Das wäre zu wenig. Wir wollen auch ein Europa, das Hoffnung macht.
Even for one of Europe's most experienced politicians, it's a considerable test. Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Frankfurt is Omid Nouripour. He's a member of Germany's parliament with the Greens. He's also on the Committee on Foreign Affairs in the German Bundestag. In Warsaw, we have Katarzyna Pisarska. She's the founder of the European Academy of Diplomacy and a program director at the Warsaw Security Forum. And in Washington, D.C. is Erik Brattberg, the director of the Europe program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Omid Nouripour, Germany took over the EU presidency from Croatia. And this would have been a very difficult task, even without a pandemic. But now that we are in the midst of one, obviously, this is a very, very difficult task for Germany, for your country. EU leaders gather for the first time in person tomorrow since the outbreak in Brussels to agree on a 750 billion euro recovery funds. How difficult do you think those negotiations will be?
I think it's going to be difficult, but it's obvious that we have to keep the European Union together. It's obvious that it's not about accesses or engines of certain countries going ahead, but not to leave any single country in the EU behind. And this is what it's about. It's about inclusion.
This is not an economic issue, says Angela Merkel, and Omid Nouripour seems to second that. Katarzyna, obviously, Poland is another country that is watching the developments in Brussels and Europe very closely. Nonetheless, you have just come out from an election, obviously. But this is a make or break issue, say all the EU leaders. We have to come together at times like this, otherwise we will weaken ourselves. Do you think, are you hopeful that the European Union will come through at a moment of crisis like this?
Well, you have to remember Poland and Central Europe has been one of the major recipients of the EU budget, especially in the cohesion and agriculture part. And the negotiations will be around actually sustaining that commitment to these two areas. But then we also have the element of solidarity with the South that has been struck so much by the current COVID-19 crisis. So these are additional funds that will be given. And the discussion how, when, the allocation criteria, that is a very important issue. On top of that, you have issues that predate COVID, such as the rule of law clauses. We are talking about actually combining, funding member states only if they abide to the rule of law. That also will be probably vetoed by Hungary and seconded by Poland. So that's another layer of negotiations. So compromises will be made. They will be painful. The key issue here is whether solidarity will remain at the top of the agenda, because I think it is a historical moment for the EU.
And Erik Brattberg, solidarity is key here, says Katarzyna Pisarska. But if we look at how Europe has fared up until now during this pandemic, the EU did not act as a unified entity during the first phase of the pandemic. There was no coordinated EU crisis management. There was a nation-first politics. At the end of the day, the EU has really portrayed an image outside that is not very favorable and flattering. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, I think that is right, Ali. I think the EU was slow to respond to the pandemic initially, but then I think the response came together. And I think we've seen quite substantial assistance provided by other European countries, especially to those countries such as Italy and Spain that were hit the hardest. You've also started to see the economic recovery pick up. So I think actually the EU response, although maybe delayed initially, is coming together. And I think it's significant that Angela Merkel has actually showed leadership so far into this pandemic, being willing to meet with President Macron of France and agree on at least a proposal for pooling and sharing of debt, which is something that so far, no German chancellor would ever agree on. So I think she has taken quite considerable steps. And I think to my other panelists' points, I think the key question now is whether she can then lead Europe to agree on not just the recovery fund, but also the next long-term budget for the European Union, which is really essential for the EU to be able to function over the coming years. And I think the fact that European leaders are meeting in person this week, I think is significant. And I hope that can be a turning point, because so far the virtual meetings that European leaders have had have failed to reach an agreement. And maybe by coming together in Brussels could be the opportunity to kind of hatch out a compromise that will be key. And I think Germany plays a hugely important role in being able to bridge the different divides between East and West and North and South in Europe and provide that leadership. So we'll have to see what comes out. But I do think there is an ambition and an intention from Berlin to try to bring Europe together at this very difficult time.
Germany plays a hugely important point, says Erik Brattberg. Omid, obviously you are one of the most prominent foreign policy voices in German politics. And when it comes to leadership and Germany, obviously it's always been a bit of a double-edged sword. This is a country that is not exactly comfortable with the notion of leadership or being a leader.
There is no doubt that Germany has to take a huge part of the burden. And obviously, all of the gaps which has been described, we had a lot of conflicts of interest within the EU before the pandemics even, that all of these gaps are emotionally crossing each other in the chancellery. Everybody is waiting for Germany's leadership, and this is why we have to deliver. This is not about dominating other countries. This is not about coming out and then being a dictator of Europe. This is not about telling to the Polish friends of ours or to the Danish friends of ours that Paris and Berlin are going to tell them what to do. This is about leadership by keeping the EU together, showing solidarity, and listening to any single voice which is of interest, and because any single country in Europe is relevant. And this is why it has to be including in an inclusive process of a presidency in the next 6 months.
Katarzyna, ahead of this crucial meeting tomorrow in Brussels, French President Macron, who never lacks big words in that sense, says the unity and future of the EU is at stake here. Is he right?
I think so, because as I said, the divisions are not only south-north, it's east-west. It's also the approach to connecting the current challenges with also long-term goals of the European Union. We have on the table the Green Deal. We have on the table sustainable development of the European Union. We also have the post-Brexit EU. How will the negotiations with the UK look like? So we're talking about an unprecedented level of complexity that has to be met, having in mind that you're dealing with 27 different countries with different histories, with different experiences. And to some extent, it is a blessing that Germany is taking the rotating presidency right now, because Germany is the most experienced honest broker that we have had in the European Union. It has played in the past a very constructive role. It is able to lead from behind, and it is generally trusted. Of course, some politicians, including in my country, play the anti-German card. We saw that also during the financial crisis in Greece. But overall, when we sit at the table, we do understand that Germany really cares about the unity of the European Union. And this is a great moment to show this and show the leadership.
Certainly a very crucial moment, a good opportunity for Germany to step up and indeed fill those shoes and high expectations, Erik. But then again, all of you have said, and said correctly, of course, the EU has faced numerous crises even before COVID. Brexit, the refugee crisis, the euro crisis, the rise in right-wing populism, as we are seeing the undermining of independent institutions across some European nations. That's too big of a task to take on by one nation or even 27, isn't it?
It is. But at the same time, I think, to my previous panelist's point, Angela Merkel is unique. She's served in office for 15 years. She's been through an EU presidency before, and she is on her way out. So I think she is looking at her legacy, and I think she will view her legacy very much as trying to keep the European Union together while facing these tremendous challenges that you mentioned. And I do think, despite the COVID crisis and the economic challenge that's facing Europe, Europe has been able to at least manage some of the crises that it's faced in recent years, be it Brexit, be it the migrant crisis, be it rising geopolitical challenges in its neighborhood. I think that there's far more support across Europe for the European Union than it was maybe before, partially as a result of these challenges. And I think, therefore, leaders and citizens of Europe are looking to European leaders to also now address the challenges facing Europe currently. And I think Germany, and led by Merkel, I think, will provide that leadership that is necessary, again, to bridge the differences here. There are countries in Northern Europe, the Netherlands, some of the Nordic countries that are skeptical of providing more financial solidarity to the southern European countries. They can only work with Germany to try to find a compromise. So I think it's the indispensable power of Europe to be able to bridge the differences and having the credibility to do so. That in some ways maybe speaks to the fact that this is an opportune time that we have Germany in charge of the presidency during these tremendous challenges that Europe is facing at the moment.
Germany obviously being the most populous and affluent European nation out there, but it has to do without one of its traditional allies these days, Omid Nouripour, doesn't it? The transatlantic relations and the traditional reliance on the United States is no longer there under US President Trump. Explain to us the difficulties of navigating Europe through world affairs without the backing, without the alliance and membership and friendship with the United States.
This is a very complicated question. To be honest, as a foreign policy guy, I traveled around through the world for the last 3 years, and the main question of anybody, no matter where I go to, even to countries like Nepal or to Japan, the main question of anybody is, how do you deal with Trump? We know that the president of the United States in these days is not the reliable partner we had before for decades. We have to be grateful for. But this is why Europe has to rely on our strength. I'm very grateful for that, what Katarzyna just said about my country. I think she's been a little bit too kind because Germany was not always the honest broker in Europe. There is one very controversial project on energy, which is Nord Stream 2. Nord Stream 2 is a back divider in the middle of the European Union. Because one of the main issues we have in Europe, which is dividing us, is the absolutely understandable concerns of the Eastern European and the Middle European partners we have when it comes to Russia. If we want to keep the European Union together, we shouldn't drive our own energy project on their cost. It's about coming together and then discuss such issues. And the most important thing for us has to be the understanding of the highest national interest of any single member of the European Union is the coherence and the solidarity within the European Union.
Well, Katarzyna, at the end of the day, we can talk about European unity all day long. But the truth is, of course, that now Brexit, the UK has left, but even those 27 EU member states that are still active and vibrant do not see eye to eye on so many issues. All these crises that we have talked about, the Eurozone crisis, the refugee crisis, they have left a bitter aftertaste and distrust amongst member states, haven't it?
Before I answer that question, let me just say one thing to the predecessor. I'm very grateful for raising the Nord Stream 2 issue. Yesterday, I hosted here in Warsaw the German Minister of Defense, Annette AKK, and she has said that if it were up to her, she would never finance such a project, that it is a project that was and is against EU solidarity, but it's a commercial project right now, very difficult to stop. So we appreciate that very much. I think the awareness, and we also appreciate your support, because we do believe most of Central Europe, also Ukraine, that is outside of the EU, that this is a harmful project for EU solidarity, and it strengthens Russia's dominant position on the EU market. Going back, Ali, to your question, I think I should be much more optimistic about the growing Euroscepticism in the EU. Actually, we see a growing support for the EU among populations, and that's a very important sign for our politicians. We see in the majority of EU countries support above 60%, my own country in the high 70s for our membership in the European Union. Apart from Italy, we're really seeing above 50%. And this shows that the populations understand the value of unity. And it is now up to the politicians to find these kind of frameworks that will allow us all to feel in one house. And it's very difficult because, again, even on the question of values, I think we can't compromise. I am personally against compromising on questions of values. But then how far can we go in telling other member states how exactly their systems should look like? Where is the red line? These are questions that EU leaders need to answer to themselves, not to compromise the entire project, but also not put in the margins of the project important member states, including Poland. So I don't have an answer to this, but again, I think we are seeing more support among the populations. And if we are able to build this recovery fund and have the money really reach out to those who need it most, especially in the South, I think that will truly strengthen EU's position for the years and decades to come.
Erik, even today's discussion on this show has somewhat revealed a political bloc, very immersed and busy with its own problems, and it has been in previous years. Does the European Union still matter outside? Does it matter? Is the European voice a fraction? Is it a factor in world affairs?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that Europe is still punching below its weight. It is 500 million people. It's the biggest single trading bloc in the world, and it should have more sort of geopolitical relevance than it does. But as we've seen in a lot of recent challenges, be it in the Middle East, be it in Asia, and beyond, Europe is punching below its weight. It is not having that influence that it could have on the international scene, and that I think is needed at the international scene. If there's one thing we've seen in recent months and years, especially during the COVID pandemic, is that neither the United States, at least currently under President Donald Trump, but also China is providing that leadership during the global pandemic. And we've seen actually Europe beginning to step up by, for instance, hosting a global vaccine conference, by beginning to hold the World Health Organization accountable for its initial response, bringing together groups of like-minded countries such as Japan, Australia, Canada on supporting multilateralism. So that is what I think the role for Europe should be. But it requires actually stepping up and showing leadership. And I think one of the great challenges that Europe is facing, that the German EU presidency will also have to reckon with, is how to deal with China, which is increasingly constituting not just an economic and trade challenge, but also a political and challenge to the multilateral order. And Germany is very keen on maintaining the trade relationship with China, trying to balance the relationship. But I think increasingly, as we're seeing with China's actions in Hong Kong, there is a need to also consider how to push back on some of those more difficult political and human rights issues. And there, I think it would behoove Germany and the European Union in general to step up and do more, and to try to coordinate those actions with like-minded democratic allies around the world. So this is really among the key challenges that Europe is facing, where Europe has an opportunity, but also a need to do more to defend itself and its own interests, but also step up and lead as part of a multilateral response to these difficult global challenges.
Omid, what is your opinion? Does Europe still matter as a political bloc? Is Europe still a significant actor on the world stage?
I fully agree with every single word Erik just said. Couldn't agree more. Obviously, the European integration is at stake, and that means there are three things at stake which are crucial for our lives. First one is, of course, the question of economic prosperity. The reason why the GDP of Poland and in Ukraine has been some kind of equal in 1990, and now Poland is 6 times of that of Ukraine, is of course also because of the European integration. Second, it's a question of peace. This is a continent which always has been on war until 1945, and then now we have some kind of peace. Not forgetting that there are countries which are on war, even in this moment, like Ukraine, because they are victims of a Russian aggression. And the third one, and we have now China announcing a systemic rivalry to us, is to defend and to be the carriers and be the ones who have the torch of who carry the torch of democracy and liberty. Look at Hong Kong. Look at a lot of countries all across Europe where freedom of media is not given, and all of that. What we achieve in this country, in our country, is in Poland. Poland wasn't the democracy 30 years away. Now it's a vibrant democracy with a bunch of things we have to discuss. But of course it is. So it's about us to stand up in this moment and say, this is not about Trump. This is about democracy. This is not about the West. This is about our systems and the way we want to live. And we don't want to live in other systems than in the ones who guarantee freedom of speech and other freedoms. And this is democracy.
30 seconds each before we wrap up. Katarzyna, what would be your ideal outcome of this German EU presidency if you had your favorite points to list and favorite outcomes to make? What are your priorities you're looking for it?
I think absolutely the EU Recovery Fund, because that is the most expected things from our southern members and from the populations there, to show that EU is truly relevant and in solidarity with them. Second of all, we would like to close Brexit. It is time for a post-Brexit world and have a good relation with the UK. And third, most importantly, that we start actually dealing with the systemic rivalries. So on the Chinese issue, on the Russian issue, where the EU foreign policy is truly coherent. And when we see these challenges as challenges to our whole systems, and thus speak with one voice. So these are the three.
Erik, what's your #1 priority that you're looking for in the German EU presidency?
I think in addition to what we just heard, which I think is a great list, I think the German EU presidency also need to look towards the future and investing in things like technology, digital, artificial intelligence, the things that will make Europe competitive in the 21st century, not just try to manage the day-to-day issues that come up during a crisis, but look towards the future and invest in those areas such as digital technology and also climate.
Omid, you get the last word. Your country, the spotlight is on you. What do you expect? What do you hope for?
I hope that we're going to have a real Green Deal, because after the pandemic, there's going to be no vaccine against the climate crisis, and this is the most important issue for humanity.
Well, we will certainly keep following this story as it unfolds. Omid Nouripour, Katarzyna Pisarska, and Erik Brattberg, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you out there for watching, of course. Hope to see you again next time for a new edition of Newsmakers.